Villain or maligned king? A skeleton found under a Leicester car park in 2012 reignited one of history's fiercest debates. Who was Richard III? Monster, myth, or misunderstood man? I'm historian and author Claire Ridgway, and today I'm joined by Wendy Johnson, historical novelist and a founder member of Philippa Langley's Looking for Richard project. In her debut novel, The Traitor's Son, Wendy traces Richard's formative decade, 1461 to 1471, through a close, character-driven lens that stays accurate to the sources and the places that shaped him. We'll talk myths to unlearn, how far a novelist can go beyond the record, favourite historical sources, the trilogy's next steps, and a few must-visit Ricardian sites for your road trip list. Let's dive in. Well, a very warm welcome to you, Wendy Johnson, to my YouTube channel. You're the author of a fabulous novel, which is on Richard III, and it's called The Traitor's Son, if I've got that right, because my brain is like a sieve at the moment, but The Traitor's Son. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it, so I just want to congratulate you, first of all, on such a wonderful novel. Okay, we'll get started with the first question, Wendy. For those on YouTube, my followers that haven't come across you before and meeting you for the first time, can you just tell us a bit about yourself and how did history, and then in particular King Richard III, come to interest you?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me, Claire. It's really great to be here, and I really appreciate it. So thank you. Yes, how did history interest me, and then Richard III? Well, I can't really remember a time when I wasn't interested in history. It seems to be something that grabbed me from a very young age, really. And I think that comes from with my parents. We used to go to castles and abbeys and places like that. And first castle I ever visited was Raby Castle in County Durham, which is a big Neville stronghold. And that I was only about 6 at the time, but it left a really big impression on me. And after that, I just loved castles. And then when I was about 8, we went to Middleham Castle in Wensleydale. And of course, that was Richard III's home, and it was also the home to Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, the Kingmaker. And I think when we went to Middleham, that was just the trigger really for everything, because I remember that my parents bought a guidebook, and in it there were some images of portraits of Richard III. And it just sort of grabbed me really. I just was fascinated by him, the way he looked, his appearance, his clothes, and also the way that in both portraits, one is the National Portrait Gallery, which is portrait, which is the most famous. It's a picture of Richard that everybody has in their mind, and also the Society of Antiquaries portrait. And when on those portraits, he's sort of looking into the sort of middle distance as if his mind's elsewhere. And he just looked an intriguing person. And I was just fascinated by the look of him, really. So that was kind of the trigger for Richard himself. And then I remember there was a TV documentary program called Second Verdict, and that was on about mid-70s. And the two actors that starred in that, it was Frank Windsor and Stratford Johns, who were used to be in Softly Softly, which was a sort of a detective drama. And in Second Verdict, what they did was they looked at historical mysteries and tried to sort of unpick them and solve them. And one particular evening, it was Richard III and the Princes in the Tower. And I remember that Frank Windsor was very much took the traditional view of, the Shakespearean Richard and the bad king and so on. And Stratford Johns took the revisionist view. And I remember thinking, well, a man couldn't be both of these things. He couldn't be an evil monster on the one hand and then a good man on the other. So I was just compelled to learn more about Richard. That just sort of set me off on a path of Ricardianism, you might say.
It is interesting how one historical character can just really grab you, isn't
Yeah,
it? Yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
And you're a founder member of Philippa Langley's Looking for Richard project, a project that kind of gripped people worldwide. What did being so close to the 2012 discovery change for you as a writer and as a Ricardian?
Well, I think as a Ricardian, it provided the chance to do something positive for Richard. And the ethos of the project right from the very beginning was to search for Richard's remains and then, if they were found, to rebury them with the dignity and honour that had been denied Richard in 1485 after the Battle of Bosworth. So after the success of the project, that really sort of galvanised me into continuing with the novel that I'd already begun. I'd started to write the novel about 4 years prior to the forming the Looking for Richard project, and that really sort of galvanised me into doing writing something positive for Richard as well. And I think as a writer, I think the excavation had, of course, revealed that Richard had suffered from a sideways curvature of the spine, condition we now know as scoliosis. So that meant that I then had to explore this in the novel. So that was something new that I hadn't really expected to deal with. So that was something that I then had to write into the novel.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people assumed that that was just propaganda, didn't they? The
Yeah,
whole scoliosis.
yeah,
So, but I think it just makes you think that he he had something that was challenging, and he
exactly.
got through it. Makes you a stronger person, doesn't it?
I think so. Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah.
And when did you first think, I have to tell Richard's story myself? And then why start particularly with his boyhood? Did you just want to cover his whole life, or how did you decide on that?
Well, I'd always enjoyed writing stories, short stories, but I'd always wanted to write a historical novel. And Richard III and the Wars of the Roses was the obvious choice for time periods. And I started to write the book in about the mid 2000s, really, with a serious intention of hopefully trying to get it published. My initial idea was to set the book around the time of the Scottish campaign of 1482. And this was when King Edward IV sent his brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, north to deal with Scottish incursions. And my initial idea was to set the novel at that time, but then intersperse it with flashbacks to Richard's childhood and then his youth. But it just didn't work. And it made me realise that if I wanted to write the novel about Richard, I had to start at the beginning. I had to start when he was a young boy. It was the only way to do it, really. It was the only way that would make sense of the things that he experienced during the early years of the Wars of the Roses. Yeah, so that's where I decided to start at the beginning.
A very good place to start. On all Julie Andrews. Oh, so going back to you being a Ricardian,
Yes.
so what caused you to take such sides? I hate saying that actually, because yeah, I'm not either, but was it Shakespeare's depiction of Richard, the whole propaganda idea? Was it a particular book, place, or a debate? What caused you to actually say, right, I'm a Ricardian?
Yeah. Well, I think we have to go back again to that first visit to Middleham Castle, at the age of 8. That was just the trigger. Um, it was, as I say, it was the portraits for some reason. And I think also the fact that a King of England had lived so close to where I grew up, it just seemed an incredible thing. A king from the north of England. And I think you could say that I became a Ricardian before I realised that there really was a controversy about him.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I really don't see the need to pick sides, but yeah,
Mm.
I understand the term. Now, I work with, Anne Boleyn, who is another person, historical person who's surrounded by myths, and I spend a lot of time sort of unpicking them, debunking them. What's one myth, if you had to choose one myth about Richard III that you most want newcomers to Richard to unlearn, what would you pick? And what do you wish that non-Ricardians understood about him?
Well, I think I would like newcomers to understand the circumstances of Richard's accession to the throne. Traditional historians like to view Richard as a usurper. Now, a usurper is someone who takes the throne illegally or by force. Now, Richard did neither of these things. He was offered the throne by the three estates of the realm. That's the Lords Spiritual, Temporal, and the Commons. But traditional historians don't like to concede this because I'm sure they like to think that if Richard's succession to the throne was illegal and suspect, then so was everything else. So I would like newcomers to understand that Richard's succession was legal, and importantly, it was seen to be legal at the time. And I think once people understand this, they start to see Richard in a new light.
Yeah, I think it depends on what side you're on as who you see as a
Yeah.
usurper, doesn't it? I mean, if you looked at history, there are so many monarchs that you could term usurpers.
Mm,
So, yeah, thank you. So, your novel, The Traitor's Son,
yeah.
focuses on a particular timeline, 1461 to 71. Why those 10 years and why such a close, intimate lens rather than it being a sweeping saga?
Well, I think these were the 10 years that formed Richard. 1461, well, the book opens in January 1461, and Richard's father has just been killed in December 1460. So that was a real crisis point in Richard's life. And from then on, his life just was crisis after crisis. And I wanted to take it up to 1471, which is the Battle of Barnet. So that's Richard's first military experience. And there's lots of novels have been written about Richard, and some of them are sweeping sagas of the Wars of the Roses, but I didn't want to repeat what other established authors had already done. What I was after doing really was an intimate narrative. I wanted an intimate narrative about Richard and his close family. I wanted to concentrate on his relationship with his brothers, Edward IV and George, Duke of Clarence. And I like to kind of think of that as the fraternal triangle, as I call it. And his relationship with his mother, Cecily, and his sister, Margaret, and the relationship with a person who I feel could well have had a strong influence in Richard's early youth, was Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick. So I wanted to concentrate the book on those relationships. And like I say, I wanted to bookend the story with the two crisis points. Um, Aftermath of the Battle of Wakefield in 61 and then 71 Battle of Barnet.
Yeah, it works really well. And what I love about your book is you really bring Richard to life as a real person. He
Thank
feels
you.
so very real. Yeah, extremely human. We see him being grief stricken. We see his loyalty coming through and his learning, his education. If you had to pick a single moment in the years 1461 to 71, which do you think best crystallizes Richard for you? I know that's quite a tough question.
It is. If I'm allowed two moments,
Okay, I'll let you off. Yeah.
I think the first moment would be after Richard has discovered that he has developed this spinal condition. Now, that couldn't have happened at a worse time for Richard because, as from what is known, Richard seems to have developed that condition between the ages of about 12 and 13. Now, in Richard's days, people of his status, that was a time where they were learning, they were undergoing their military nightly training, they were learning how to use weapons, they were building up their bodies in order to be able to use those weapons. And I think for Richard to suddenly experience this, this discovery of this spinal condition must have been a trauma for him. And in the book, initially he sees this as a failing because all Richard wants to do in the book is to make his father proud of him, to become the man that he thinks his father would have wanted him to be had his father lived. So at this point, when he discovers the spinal condition, he thinks he's let his father down, and he also thinks he's let Warwick down. But then he starts to consider this, perhaps this is a test from God in order to prove his worth. So what he does, he looks inside of himself and he summons every ounce of courage and determination that he has. And he says to himself, I'm a son of York, I'm a scion of the house of Neville, and if God trusts me to succeed, then I will. So that's a deeply personal decision he makes to to rise above the condition and to become the man that his father would have wanted him to be. So that's, I think, the first moment that crystallizes him. I think the second is the moment when Warwick turns against Edward IV, when Warwick rebels. Edward then recalls Richard south, and Richard then faces what writers call a critical choice. He has to decide whether to pledge his allegiance to Edward, his blood brother and king, or to Warwick, the man who he's come to look upon as a sort of a second father, as you might say. But either way seems like a betrayal to Richard, because he knows how this is going to end. It's only going to end in one way, and that's on the battlefield. But he knows he has to choose. He has to make that choice. So in the end, it's a sort of an innate sense of loyalty to the name of York, to his father's name, which wins out, and he pledges his loyalty to his brother Edward.
Oh, thank you. And this, thankfully, your book, thankfully, is the first of a trilogy. Thankfully, yeah. So we've got more Richard to come. So where do you see books 2 and 3 beginning and ending?
Well, book 1 ends just at the aftermath of the Battle of Barnet in April 1471. So book 2 begins only just a few weeks later, actually, just prior to the Battle of Tewkesbury in May 1471. And that's going to take Richard up to the early months of 1483. Now, in February 1483, at the Parliament, Edward IV awarded Richard a great swathe of land in the north of England, which became known as the Palatinate. And the idea of this was to form a sort of a buffer state between England and Scotland. And that was an area where Richard was going to make his base. And so if history had turned out differently, that's where Richard's future would have lain, on the borders of England and Scotland. But of course, Edward dies in April 1483. So book 2 will end where Richard rides north, you know, happy with this new responsibility. But then book 3 begins when he's on the Scottish borders and he's informed of the untimely death of his brother Edward IV. And then his life turns on its head. He has to return to London. So book 3 will cover the reign, and of course it'll end on the battlefield of Bosworth. How I'm going to cover the Battle of Bosworth and where I'm going to stop, I'm not entirely sure, but it's going to be a climax, at a dramatic point, but I'm not quite sure exactly how I'm going to do that yet.
Oh, wow. Oh, I'm excited. Now, you're a historian as well as an author. And this question is very personal to me, actually, because my first love is creative writing, but I've ended up writing non-fiction, and I'd really love to get back to fiction. But for me, it really is hard to draw a line between being a historian and, you know, the world of the novelist. So where do you draw a line between the historical record and the novelist's imagination? Because if you don't, you could just retell the story according to history and it would be rather boring. You need to fill in the blanks. And perhaps sometimes you even need to go against historical record. I just don't know how you balance that when you've got your historian's head and your novelist's head on at the same time.
Yeah, it is difficult, but I was determined never to go against the historical record. Because I wanted facts to form the backbone of the novel, and I wanted it to seem as real as it could. So when we know where Richard was at any given time, then that's where he is in the novel, and I weave that into the scenes. If we don't know where he is at any given point, it does give you that little bit of leeway to fill in the blanks. But I try to keep those moments to a minimum, because as a writer, I feel that once I begin to invent things, the novel loses its credibility. It starts to just lose that little bit of authenticity. So yeah, I've been determined to stick as closely to the facts as possible.
So it's just filling in the blanks.
Filling in the blanks.
With things that would actually work.
Yeah, yes, that's right. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
sometimes you read novels and it's clear that I'm not picking on anyone in particular, but it is clear that the person has no clue of the United Kingdom and the fact that there's no way you could get from one place to another place in
Yeah.
24 hours and that.
Yeah.
So at least you know the areas you're writing about. So what were your favourite historical sources then for the brothers Edward, George, and Richard?
I used a number of sources, both original and secondary, but I didn't really have one particular favourite. But one source that I found really useful, it's called The Arrival, and it is a contemporary document. Well, it's a contemporary account of Edward the Fourth's return to England, because what happened was Edward had to flee along with Richard and the Woodvilles and all of his followers to the Low Countries when Warwick had rebelled and he'd re-established Henry VI on the throne. So what The Arrival is, it's a contemporary account of Edward and the Yorkists' return to England and the two battles that Edward had to then face to reclaim his crown. Now, it is a Yorkist source, but it was written at the time under Edward's direction, so it possibly slightly biased in Edward's favour, but it is virtually contemporary with the events that it's discussing. So I thought that was great to be able to use that as an account of that was an incredible thing that Edward continually had to fight for his crown. And I mean, two battles, the Battle of Mortimer's Cross and then the Battle of Towton. He became king, and then sure enough, he had to return and fight two more battles. And I don't think any king has had to undergo that, really, fighting for his crown on so many occasions. So I can understand why Edward wanted to record that. But as I say, it is probably slightly biased when it comes to the probably numbers in the battles as well. They always like to make it look as if, they were fighting against the odds, sort
Yes.
of thing. So
They were outnumbered and
they were
they,
outnumbered, exactly.
yeah.
But yeah, it was written so close to the time that I had to use that, and I found that good because I thought here is a contemporary document, so that was really good.
And during your research for the novel and the other two, was there a kind of rabbit hole that you ended up disappearing down? I mean, I love research rabbit holes, but sometimes you do have to
Yeah.
kind of be wary with them. Was there one that you went down and that you really, really enjoyed researching, but then had to cut?
Yeah.
And if so, why?
I think every avenue of research could end up being a rabbit hole, couldn't it, if you let it? But I had to keep reminding myself that this was Richard's story. It's written in the present tense, and it's also written in what they call third person limited. So it's limited to Richard, what he knows at any given point. So I couldn't afford any sort of retrospection or let myself get carried away because I could only write what Richard knew at that moment. So I had to sort of pull myself back from anything like any kind of rabbit holes.
Yeah, you can spend an awful lot of time disappearing down rabbit holes and then never
Yes,
using them.
yes,
They are great though. And were there any ideas? Because as you said, you really try and keep faith with the facts,
yeah.
and you're writing a very personal novel, it's emotional. Were there any ideas that you really liked, but then had to cut out because the evidence didn't support them?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I did make facts the backbone of the novel at all times, really, and I didn't feel free to invent too many things, to be honest, because I'm always conscious of the people that you're writing about were real people, and I always try to portray them as realistically as I possibly can, and I think you do owe that to these people because they were real people. Um, there are some elements of conjecture, which I think is inevitable, really, because you can't know exactly what people were thinking. You can't get inside their heads much as you'd like to do that. But any conjecture that I've made, I haven't let it stray beyond the realms of possibility. Tried to keep it credible.
Yeah, true to the times, true to the people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, you talked earlier about visiting places kind of in your childhood and your youth. Now, place is very vivid in your novel. I think that's another thing you do brilliantly is bringing places to life. You know, you've got Ludlow, Middleham, London. Did you visit each of the places that you write about and then try and imagine yourself walking in those people's footsteps, stepping back in time? And if so, which of the locations in your novel surprised you the most when you actually went and visited and kind of stood there as a novelist with a notebook?
Yeah. Well, I have been to most of these places. When it comes to Middleham, I grew up very close to Middleham, as I say, so that's always been a part of my life, and I know the place inside and out. So when it comes to setting scenes at Middleham, that was easy. That was easy to imagine. I found London quite a bit more difficult because obviously there's not many buildings in existence today in modern London that Richard would have known, but I found a wonderful resource called the Agas Map of Early Modern London. And what that is, I can see you know about that.
Yeah, I'm nodding because
Marvellous, isn't
that's
it?
fantastic.
And that's images of London, well, a map of London as it would have been about 1560. So it's not too long after Richard's time. And I found that was fantastic because there's a little search field there, and you can search for particular things if you want to know where a particular street was, or a particular church, or a particular ward of the city, or you can work out, well, if somebody's going from A to B, which streets would they go down, how would they get there? And that just helped enormously when it came to London. I was really grateful that I discovered that. One of the settings I found was quite difficult to portray in the novel was the Low Countries, because Richard does visit the Low Countries twice in the novel. The first time, he's 8 years old, and he and his brother George, who was 11 years old, were sent to the Low Countries for safety after their father was killed at the Battle of Wakefield. Now, I've never been there, but I did find the internet was marvellous for trying to discover a little bit about the area. Now, the place he stayed was Utrecht. They stayed in the Palace of Bishop David of Utrecht. And again, there was plenty of information about that on the internet, which was really helpful. And just near the palace, there's a large bell tower called the Dom Toren. Now, that still exists. And I found a little video on YouTube of the sound of the bells from the bell tower. And I played it, and the sounded so different to the sound of bells that you hear in this country. They were very melodic and very tinkling and just a beautiful sound. And it occurred to me that when Richard was there and he heard these bells, it would seem so different from what he refers to as the big booming bells of London. So it was nice to be able to hear that sound and then try and write about it in the book. Because
Yeah.
it just seemed to bring the sound of Utrecht to me
Yeah,
writing.
it's very appealing to your senses, and that
Yeah,
helps you I think step into a person's life, helps you go
yeah,
back all those years.
yeah,
Yeah. Now let's get back to Richard
yeah.
as the man, the person. So how would you describe the Richard that you came to know through your research? Who was he?
Well, I think he was a person who cared very much about the people who were close to him. He was loyal, very loyal to his family. And I think above all, he was a person to whom justice was very important. Justice for all levels of society. Um, Unusually for the time, he cared deeply about the welfare of the common man. We know from existing evidence that he personally intervened to assist those who appealed to him for help. Traditional historians like to suggest an ulterior motive for this, that it was some kind of sham, that Richard was simply currying favour. But if this was the case, he'd have curried favour with the powerful people, those who could support him politically and militarily. But what he did, the records show that the people he helped were from the poorest levels of society, the people who didn't have a voice. And some of the acts of his only parliament were directed, aimed at the support and welfare of the common person. So I think that says a lot about Richard, and you can see that in him, not just when he's king either. You can see it in him as Duke of Gloucester as well. So I think that is clearly an element of his character, that justice was something that he felt was really important, justice for all. Um, Richard, of course, is noted for being loyal to his brother Edward IV, and he was, absolutely. But I don't think he was blindly loyal. If he supported something, I think it was for a reason, because it meant something to him. I don't feel he would support something that he didn't agree with just to please the king. What he did was he stood up for what he believed to be right. And I think that is the kind of person Richard was,
And
standing up
I
for what's
think that's the Richard that's kind of got lost, isn't
right.
it?
It is,
A lot of people don't know that
absolutely.
about him.
Mm,
So
absolutely.
people focus too much on the whole princes,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
debate,
yeah,
and not what Richard actually stood for, what he did,
yeah.
before he became king and then when he was king. So moving on to your writing, your kind of writing rituals, what does a writing day look like for you? I mean, do you even have a writing day? Do you have a tight schedule, or do you go with your inspiration? Do you let inspiration dictate?
I don't have a set schedule. I do write every day, 7 days a week, but usually for 2 to 3 hours a day. So I,
That's a long time. That's a lot of writing in a week. How do you know how many words you'd get done during that time?
don't really, because what I do is a lot of that's research as well.
Yes.
So I think of it as sort of rather a writing day, a kind of a writing and research day, a sort of working on the novel day, rather than just, head down actually writing. It's everything that's involved in the writing process. But I feel I don't like to sort of take the day off, because I enjoy it. I
Hmm.
just enjoy it, and as long as I can do so much each day, then that's good. I
I
enjoy
think that
it.
staves off writer's block as well,
Yeah,
because I mean, I'm quite often asked about, do I suffer with writer's block? And I just think it's really important to just write, whatever it is. You don't even, it doesn't need to be a project, just write, keep
it's right.
writing,
Yeah,
keep in
yeah,
practice.
I agree.
And did you have someone who was, when you first wrote the novel, did you have someone that acted as a beta reader for you, whose feedback then actually changed the book for the better? And if so, what did you change?
Well, when I was writing the book, I kept it very close to my chest, and nobody read it. Not one person read it at that point. It was only when I'd finished it and now I'd edited it so many times, um, and only that point, when I was happy with it, did I have the courage to let anyone else read it. So what I did initially, what my main goal was to find out, is this good enough for publication? Is the writing of a high enough standard? So what I did was I sent it to a literary consultancy for their opinion. And when I got a favourable response from them, I thought, well, that's great. But I think the next step is to find out what Ricardians actually think about the book. So what I did was I asked my Ricardian friend Tony Mount, if she'd like to read it. I know she's very busy, but I said, if you have time, would you mind reading it? And she did. She was very good. She took the time to read it, and she used to keep sending me updates about what she'd read and what she thought. And she did make some very, very useful suggestions. And one of the things she suggested was actually the title. She thought the title that I had at the time, which was Son of Fotheringay, didn't really it didn't really sound exciting, and it might not catch the eye of a publisher or an agent. So she said she thought it was good to suggest something that might suggest the dangers of the medieval world that I was writing about. So she suggested The Traitor's Son as a title. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, that actually works in two ways, really, because at the beginning of the novel, Richard's father has been branded a traitor by his Lancastrian enemies. And then towards the end of the book, the man who Richard has come to consider as a father figure, Richard, Earl of Warwick, does turn traitor against his king. So I thought the traitor's son kind of fits on two levels, really.
Yeah, I think the trouble with the son of Fotheringay is not everyone knows
That's right.
where Fotheringay is and why it's important.
Yeah,
And I like this traitor son. I'm glad you went with that. I think
thank
that's a
you.
really strong title that grabs you.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, if people want to step back in time and do a Ricardian road trip and see the sights, what would be your three must-visit sites to feel this not your particular novel?
Well, I think Middleham definitely. That's an absolute must, because it played such an important role in Richard's life, and it was also home to Warwick the Kingmaker. And anybody who ever goes to Middleham always says the same thing about, although it's a ruined castle, everybody always says what an atmosphere there is there. It really is a dramatic place. It seems to have a climate all of its own. It's always windy there at Middleham, where the castle is. It's always windy, and quite often it's cold as well. But it does have such an atmosphere, and I think, a lot of Ricardians like to go there and just soak up the atmosphere. So I would say definitely Middleham is the first place. And then I think York as well. A city of York is a must see, because Richard had a very close relationship with the city of York and with the Minster. The council and the aldermen considered him their especial good lord. And also, the good thing about York is there's so many medieval buildings still existing. So if you do visit York, you'll see quite a number of buildings that Richard himself would have seen. So York is definitely the second place. For the third, I think Warwick Castle, because that does feature in the book. And anybody who visits Warwick will say what a magical place it looks. It's just such a beautiful castle, and it looks like a fairy tale castle almost like Camelot. And I just wonder if when Richard visited for the first time, was he overawed with the splendor of it? What did he think? So yeah, I think Middleham definitely first, York, and then Warwick would be the places.
Oh, I need to add Middleham to my list because I've never been to Middleham. I've been to York a few times, and yeah, as you say, it's one of those places where there's so much history.
Yeah,
You are seeing
seeing.
places that the historical characters you're writing about saw themselves. And
Yeah,
then yeah, I grew up near Warwick and Kenilworth, so I kind of take them for granted because they were
yeah,
such a big part of my childhood. You take these places for granted, but
yeah.
yeah, Warwick Castle is amazing.
It
I know
is.
it gets criticized for some people say it's Disneyfied or whatever, but I still it no, it's amazing.
It's
It's
still a wonderful sight, isn't it?
yeah, and really well maintained as well.
It is. It is, yeah.
And if you could stage one scene from the Traitor Son for the perhaps the big screen or a series, which scene would you choose and why? And which actors would you cast as well? I know that's a really tough question, but if you had the choice, so which scene and which actors?
I think it is a very, very difficult question, but I think one of my very favourite scenes in the book takes place at Middleham Castle, and it takes place shortly after Richard has commenced his military training under Warwick. Um, and Warwick has arranged for Richard to spar against Robert Percy. Now, Robert Percy was a real person, and he was a good friend of Richard's, and he was Richard's friend for the rest of his life. But in this particular scene, Richard spars against Robert Percy. Robert Percy is 6 years older than Richard. He's bigger, he's stronger, he's more experienced. So inevitably, Richard loses the bout, and Percy wins it. But later that evening, Warwick summons Richard to his presence, and compliments him on his performance. In fact, he says to him that I couldn't be more proud of you if you were my own son. But Richard feels he's failed, and he won't accept the compliment. But then Warwick produces a gift that he's had made for Richard, and it's a French estoc, a sword, that he's had made particularly for Richard, and it has an inscription on it on the blade, which is optimo, meaning the best. And Richard says he's far from being the best. He failed, and he's far from being the best that day. But Warwick knows that Richard's greatest desire is to be the man his father wanted him to be. So Warwick says to him, well, if you're not the best, you must strive to be the best. If not for my sake, then for your father's. So it's a very emotional scene because it bonds the two together. Because here we have Richard, the fatherless youth, um, who's looking for a father figure in his life. We have Warwick, a man who has everything he could wish for, but he doesn't have a son. So here we have the two who then fill the void in each other's lives. And that becomes the enduring theme of the novel. So I think that would definitely be the scene I would choose. And as far as actors are concerned, it's a difficult one. But I had a friend who once said to me that when she pictured Stanley Baker, the late actor Stanley Baker, she would always think of him as Warwick. It was something she had in her mind, and sort of a strong, confident presence. And so that's always stayed with me. So whenever I think of Warwick, I think of the actor Stanley Baker. So I think if it was possible to have actors from past and present, I'd definitely have him playing the Earl of Warwick. The 13-year-old Richard, bit more difficult, but I think perhaps a teenage Daniel Radcliffe might have done a good job with that.
Oh, interesting choices. Yeah. Daniel Radcliffe is. I like it. And if you could travel back in time and have a chat with Richard, what would you ask him? What's your burning question?
I think what I'd ask him is about the moment that Robert Stillington, Bishop of Bath and Wells, came forward and revealed that Edward IV had actually been a bigamist. That when Edward had married his queen, Elizabeth Woodville, he'd already been married to Lady Eleanor Butler. Now, Stillington said he could vouch for this because he'd actually been present when this secret marriage with Eleanor Butler had taken place. So this, of course, left serious consequences for the succession because if Edward was already married when he married the Queen, any children that they subsequently produced between them would be illegitimate and unable to succeed to the throne. So Richard knows at this moment that if the boys are illegitimate, his world's turned on its head. Things can't carry on as they are, and subsequently Richard is offered the crown by the three states. And it's these few days, these few weeks in history upon which Richard is judged, I feel. So I would like to ask him about that moment when Stillington came forward with his revelation, because that was the moment that changed Richard's life forever. And how did that feel?
Yeah, it changed the course of history, didn't
Changed the
it?
course of history, yeah.
A dramatic moment. Yeah, to be a fly on the wall at that moment. Yeah. Okay, dream dinner. Right, you and three 15th century guests. So who would be at your table and what would you ask them?
Well, I think it would have to be the three York brothers, Edward IV, George, Duke of Clarence, and Richard III. My first question might be, would somebody mind passing the wine jug? Because they'd have the best of wines, wouldn't they? But I think a serious question would be, I'd like to know, I'd like to ask each of them, what is the happiest moment in each of their lives? Because it's good to think that despite all the traumas and the violence and the heartache that they went through, it would be good to think that they did experience some happy moments as well. So I think I'd like to ask that question. Was their happiest moments in their lives?
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Focusing on the happy. And
Yeah,
they'd of course get even happier if they were drinking the wine.
well, they would, yeah.
After people have read your novel, I'm sure they're going to be hungry to sort of know more and pick up a non-fiction book. So which non-fiction book would you recommend people read about Richard if they're hungry for more on him?
Well, my very favourite book about Richard is Jeremy Potter, Good King
Ooh.
Richard. An account of Richard III and his reputation. Now, this was written some considerable years ago, and unfortunately, it's not in print at the moment, but it is available on Amazon, and I imagine it's available in libraries as well through interlibrary loans. But it's an excellent introduction to Richard and the controversies that surround him. So if it's a person who doesn't know too much about the Wars of the Roses or doesn't know too much about Richard himself, this is an excellent place to start. And if they can't get their hands on a copy of this, although it's well worth trying, it's a brilliant book. I would say there's also Annette Carson's Richard III, A Small Guide to the Great Debate, which again it covers all of the controversy which surrounds Richard, and it's a great way to learn about that. And Annette says at the end, whatever you choose to believe in the end, this book will give you insights you won't find in conventional histories. So I'd say one or other, or better still, both of those two would be a
Thank
good
you.
choice.
And how's book 2 going? And do you have any other projects on the go at the same time?
Book two is going well. We're well on with it. It's going slowly though, mainly due to the research and also due to the way I write. How I write is that I write a scene, I complete it, and I immediately go back and edit it. And then I'll go back and edit it again and edit it again. And until I'm happy with it, I don't want to move on to the next scene. I like to feel that when I move on to a scene, I'm happy with what I'm leaving behind me. And
Mm.
that does mean that it slows down the progress a bit. But what's good about it is that it gives me the confidence to proceed with the next scene. And also it means that at the end, when I do the big edit, most of the work's been done already. So it makes that big edit at the end so much easier, because I've done these little edits in between. So that slows me down, but unfortunately it works. That's the way it works, so it's
Yeah,
good for me. Other projects, I've got none on the go at the moment. I'm concentrating all my efforts on the novel at the moment.
brilliant. And when you're writing, when you're doing your writing your novel, working on your novel, do you listen to music or do you need silence?
Yeah, I do like to listen to music. Sometimes I like to look on YouTube at there's a channel called Musica Medieval, and that's contemporary music from the medieval period. And so I like to listen to that, the instrumental pieces, because that just puts you in the time. But also, I think my favorite composer is Debbie Wiseman. I think her music's absolutely beautiful, and she's written some lovely pieces. She tends to write music based around a theme. There's one, The Glorious Garden, where she's written a piece for to represent different plants, different flowers, different shrubs in the garden. And her music's just absolutely beautiful. There's a track called Myrtle, which I think is one of the most beautiful pieces of music I've ever listened to. But what she is known mostly for, I think, is a soundtrack for Wolf Hall. And I absolutely love that. And I know it's not Richard's time period, but I find if I play the theme track, the theme music for Wolf Hall, it really sort of galvanizes the writing. And yeah, I just really like it.
So no heavy metal then.
No, but I am a heavy metal fan, so
Because yeah, sometimes people like to have atmospheric music that's kind of from the period they're writing about, and other
yeah,
people like something
something
completely
modern.
different. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank
yeah.
you. Oh, this has been so lovely, Wendy. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Wendy Johnson, novelist and writer of The Traitor Son. It's been wonderful having you here, and I know
Thank
that my
you.
followers will really enjoy this interview and getting to know more about you and your novels. So thank you very much for joining me. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me, Claire. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure.